Actually shoved me, toward the front door of my own ranch at 7:42 p.m., right when the holiday lights were blinking on across the porch railings. The guests saw it. Some even gasped. And all I could think in that split second her hand pressed hard against my shoulder was how strange it felt to be pushed out of a home I had lived in for 43 years. Before you begin, take a deep breath, because this isn't just a story. It's a moment every woman fears, and a victory every woman deserves. Watch until the very end. You're disrupting my event, she hissed, her teeth barely moving. The string lights reflected in her eyes, making her look colder than the December air rolling in behind me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even touch her arm. I just steadied myself on the wooden banister, inhaled slowly, and let the cold night air settle against my skin. I learned long ago, raising children, running a ranch, burying a husband, that silence can be louder than shouting. And that night, I had no intention of wasting my words on someone who wasn't worth them. My calm seemed to irritate her more than any argument could have. She straightened her dress, flicked imaginary dust off her shoulder, and lifted her chin like she'd practiced the gesture in a mirror. She had performed for an audience so long she couldn't break character, not even now. Behind her, music thumped through the walls of my home. My son's friends and her side of the family laughed, clinked glasses, and danced like nothing outside this doorway was happening. The winter wind carried the smell of barbecue and pine wreaths, all things I had arranged before she declared the party hers. I looked past her shoulder into the dining room, where my late husband's portrait hung. It wasn't the original frame. She had replaced it with a modern one she found more fitting. That was the first sign she intended to rewrite everything here, starting with history. She leaned closer. Why are you just standing there? Go home. I wanted to laugh at the irony. I was home. She wasn't. Not really. Not legally. Not in any meaningful way. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I adjusted my sweater sleeves, brushed a strand of gray hair behind my ear and whispered, I didn't realize I needed an invitation to my own property. Her eyes widened for a flicker of a moment, a crack in her polished expression. She knew exactly what I meant. She also knew what I knew. Every acre of this ranch still belonged to me. That truth hung between us like a shadow. But she quickly recovered, flipping her blonde curls back with a little laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Well, tonight isn't about property lines, she said. It's about respect. Respect. She said it so casually, like she hadn't just shoved a 70-year-old woman out of her own doorway. I felt a slow warmth build in my chest. Not anger exactly. More like recognition. A realization. She had spent years masking this side of herself with sugary smiles and overly sweet compliments. Tonight the mask finally cracked. A gust of wind slipped across the porch, rattling the metal wind chimes my husband hung the year before he passed. The soft clinking noise grounded me in the moment, reminding me of the countless evenings I'd stood here watching sunsets, watering hanging plants, handing lemonade to workers, welcoming neighbors during summer cookouts. This porch carried more memories than she could ever understand. And now she was telling me to leave it. Inside, I heard my son's voice, laughing at something someone said. He hadn't noticed the commotion yet. He never noticed much when she was near him. He lived in a haze around her, trying to keep peace, tiptoeing through his own marriage like he was scared to breathe wrong. For years I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. She was young, overwhelmed, trying to find her place. But the place she tried to claim tonight wasn't hers to take. All right, I murmured softly, finally stepping fully out onto the porch. If that's what you want. Her smile stretched wide, too wide. She believed she'd won. That she had proved something. That I was small enough to fold under her pressure. She didn't notice the way I glanced toward the old office window on the left side of the porch. The one room she never entered because she claimed it smelled dusty. She didn't know what was in those cabinets. She didn't know what was in the fireproof box beneath the wooden desk. She didn't know the papers my husband and I signed decades ago, or the updates I made after he passed. She didn't know the advantage I kept quiet for so long because I wanted peace more than I wanted power. He'll know. She folded her arms. Good. Enjoy the night. Somewhere else. I stepped down the porch stairs, my hand gliding slowly across the railing. The wood was cool beneath my palm, familiar in a way nothing else in the world felt. From this exact rail, I had watched storms roll in, seen my children take their first steps in the yard, waved goodbye to my husband as he drove his old truck down the gravel road. "Somewhere else," she said. But there was nowhere else. This ranch was the only ground I had ever called mine. I reached the bottom step and turned halfway, just enough to look at her without meeting her eyes. I didn't want her to see the thoughts forming in my mind. Not yet. The porch light flickered above her head. Another thing she had insisted on replacing, despite having no idea how to wire a socket. She claimed the old one was outdated. My husband had installed that one too. She replaced anything that reminded her she wasn't the center of the story. A guest stumbled toward the door behind her, laughing loudly with a drink in hand. He nearly bumped into her. She flinched and snapped at him, her smile disappearing instantly. Then she spun back to me, her face tightening again. "Are you going?" she asked. "Yes," I said gently. "Just not far." I let those words hang in the air long enough to make her uneasy. Her eyebrows lowered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I simply began walking across the gravel, my shoes crunching softly under the weight of the evening frost. The night sky above was clear, dotted with stars spreading across the wide darkness. The moonlight cast a faint silver glow on the barn, the fences, the oak tree my son carved his initials into when he was 12. Every part of this land held a piece of my life. She couldn't erase that, no matter how many parties she hosted or decorations she replaced. Halfway across the yard I paused. From this angle I could see through the living room window. She had already returned to the party, smiling again as if nothing had happened. She touched my son's arm and whispered something into his ear. He nodded, unaware of the storm quietly forming outside his walls. The music picked up again. Laughter rose. A group gathered around the fireplace I built on a hot June day 30 years ago. The ranch glowed with life, but the warmth felt false now, like a spotlight hiding cracks beneath it. I wrapped my coat tighter around my shoulders and began walking toward the office. The door creaked slightly as I opened it, a familiar sound. The scent of old paper and cedar filled the small room, calming my pulse. I flicked on the desk lamp, and its yellow glow spread across the surface, illuminating the scratches and stains left from years of work. My hand drifted to the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Locked. Just as I left it. I pulled the key from my sweater pocket, the same key I carried every day but rarely used. It fit smoothly into the lock. The drawer rolled open with a soft metallic slide. Inside lay the documents she thought time had erased. I let my fingers rest gently on the manila folder. My name was printed on the cover. Not hers. Not my son's. A gust of wind brushed the window behind me, rattling the frame slightly. The house lights flickered in the distance. Someone inside shouted for more music. Someone else laughed too loudly. The party went on, oblivious. I lifted the folder. And that was the moment I understood, fully, clearly, that the woman who shoved me tonight hadn't just disrespected me. She had walked straight into a trap she didn't know she set for herself. I closed the drawer softly, tucked the folder under my arm and turned toward the doorway. And there she was. Standing in the porch light. Staring at me. Arms crossed. Jaw tight. "How long," she asked, "have you been planning whatever this is?" I stepped forward, stopping just outside the office doorway, the cold air brushing against my face. "I wasn't planning anything," I said, holding her gaze for the first time that night. "But you just made it very easy." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, uncertainty slipped into her expression. "Why do you have that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Not yet. I simply stepped past her, leaving her frozen on the porch as the party lights flickered behind her. And I knew, when she followed me back inside, the real confrontation would begin. Her footsteps trailed behind me across the porch, quick and sharp, as if she was afraid to let even a breath of space form between us. The warm air from the house brushed against my face as I stepped back through the doorway she had tried to force me out of only minutes earlier. The contrast stung, heat inside, cold outside, yet neither feeling matched the chill winding through my chest. The party was still alive, but the energy had shifted. I could feel it even before I saw it. Guests weren't laughing as boldly anymore. A few glanced in our direction with confused, darting eyes. Someone quietly turned down the music, leaving the room pulsing with a softer beat that made everything feel strangely exposed. She must have sensed the shift as well, because she stayed close behind me, so close I could feel her breath near my shoulder. You need to put that folder back, she said quietly but not quietly enough. A couple nearby turned to look. Her voice trembled just a little. Barely noticeable unless you had spent years learning to read the slightest changes in tone the way mothers often do. I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked toward the hallway leading to the den, the folder held firmly against my chest. My hand felt warm where it touched the paper, though the rest of my body felt oddly cold. The hallway smelled faintly of cinnamon and eucalyptus candles she had spread through the house. She tried so hard to replace the scent of saddle leather and old wood, the smell this ranch had carried long before she arrived. I stepped into the den and the soft lamp light washed over everything. The old quilt draped across the couch, the wooden frame my son made in high school, the rug my husband and I bought at a county fair 30 years ago. Things she wanted to replace piece by piece. Things she believed she already owned. She closed the door behind her. That small click made my pulse slow for a moment. Not from fear, just awareness. We were alone now. No witnesses. No polite distractions. No excuses she could hide behind. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, she said. Her voice was sweet again, the kind of sweetness that coats over bitterness. We can talk. Just put it down. I finally turned to face her. Her expression was softer than it had been outside. Softer but not honest. Her eyes kept flitting toward the folder in my arms, then back to my face, trying to decipher whether I had read anything inside it yet. I didn't know you kept all that, she added, taking a small step forward. Her shoes tapped lightly against the hardwood floor, sounding much too delicate for the weight of her intentions. I tilted my head, studying her. You didn't ask, I said quietly. She laughed under her breath. Not a happy laugh, a panicked one. Why would I ask? You and we don't talk about those things. That doesn't mean they disappeared. Her jaw tightened. That part at least was honest. A silence settled in the room, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every small sound. My own breathing, the faint music from the living room, the slow tick of the clock above the fireplace. She must have heard it too because she shifted uncomfortably, folding her arms across her chest. I thought you trusted me, she said suddenly. Her choice of words struck me, not because they were true but because she genuinely believed they should work. She believed trust was something she could demand, not earn. I trusted my son, I corrected gently. That's not the same. She blinked, absorbing that. Her face stiffened again. Look, she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I don't know what you think you're going to do with that folder, but... I'm not thinking, I interrupted softly. I'm remembering. That startled her. A shadow flickered across her face. The truth was, I hadn't opened this folder in years. Not because I forgot, but because I wanted peace in my household. I wanted my son to have a comfortable marriage. I wanted my home to be a safe place for everyone, including her. I had convinced myself that keeping quiet was best. But the moment she shoved me, a woman old enough to be her mother, a woman who built this ranch from nothing, that quiet part of me crumbled. And what stood in its place was a version of myself I hadn't touched in a long time. I walked toward the old wooden desk in the den and gently placed the folder on the surface. She watched every movement, her breath hitching. The lamp beside the desk cast a warm glow across the papers inside, illuminating dates, signatures, and the familiar stamp of the attorney who had helped my husband and me secure the ranch decades ago. She moved closer, peering over my shoulder. You don't understand how much trouble this could cause, she whispered. For whom? I asked. She didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her silence told me everything I had suspected but refused to admit. She knew exactly what was in these documents. She knew the terms she agreed to. She knew she didn't hold the power she pretended to have. But she had underestimated something far worse. My memory. I lifted the first page and the paper rustled softly, so gently it almost mocked the tension in the room. The beige sheet looked worn along the edges, but the ink was dark and crisp. My husband's signature near the bottom made my chest tighten for a moment. His handwriting was always bold, confident, steady. He had insisted we prepare everything just in case. I used to laugh at that phrase. Now it felt prophetic. She leaned an elbow on the desk, trying to appear casual, but her fingers tapped rapidly, an anxious rhythm she couldn't control. We were young back then, she said. You can't hold that against me now. I'm not holding anything against you, I replied. Not yet. She flinched. I turned the page, scanning the next set of clauses. One line caught my eye, the one about conduct. The one about disrespect toward the property owner. The one with her signature right below it. She must have noticed the moment my eyes stopped moving. Her breath drew in sharply. "You're not seriously, you wouldn't," her voice faltered. "This isn't fair." Fair. The word echoed in my mind like a distant bell. Fairness was not what she believed in. Fairness was what she demanded when she feared losing. "Fair," I repeated quietly. "Do you want to talk about fairness?" She bit her lip, suddenly looking much younger, like a child caught doing something she knew was wrong. For the first time since my son married her, I saw vulnerability instead of arrogance. And I wondered how long she had been hiding it. "I've worked hard around here," she said quickly. "You know I have. Everything I've done, every improvement, every plan, it was to help." "To help," I echoed, not challenging, not agreeing, just letting the word hang. She took it as an invitation to continue. "You don't give me any credit. You don't see the things I do. You don't understand how hard it is being compared to you all the time." Her voice cracked slightly. That surprised me. I expected anger, not desperation. "I'm not your competition," I said gently. "You act like it," she snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react. Age teaches you that some battles don't need volume to be won. I closed the folder softly and placed both hands on the desk. The wood felt warm beneath my palms, grounding me back into the moment. She watched every movement. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "A conversation," I said. "One we should have had years ago." She sank slowly onto the edge of the couch, her breath uneven. The lamp's soft glow illuminated her face, revealing tension lines I hadn't noticed before. Maybe she was tired too. Tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of pushing boundaries to feel relevant. I sat down in the chair across from her, the folder still in reach. Neither of us touched it. But it might as well have been a third person in the room, watching, waiting, listening. She rubbed her hands together. "If you use those papers against me," she said quietly, "it will destroy everything." I studied her. "I'm not planning to destroy anything." "You already have," she burst. "The moment you picked that folder up, you changed everything." Her voice echoed slightly in the den. She stared at me, breathing hard, tears threatening behind her lashes. "Then tell me why it scares you," I said. "Tell me what you think is going to happen." She stood suddenly, pacing the small room, her steps hurried. "You're doing this because you hate me." "I don't hate you," I said softly. "I just finally see you." She stopped. The words hit her harder than anything else I'd said. She turned slowly, her shoulders trembling. "What?" she whispered. "Do you see?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I reached across the desk, opened the folder again, and pulled out a single page, the one she feared most. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. Her hands curled tightly at her sides. And before I could even speak, she took one step forward and asked, "Are you going to use that against me?" I looked up at her, meeting her eyes fully. "We're going to talk," I said calmly. "But what happens after depends on you." She swallowed hard. And for the first time that night, she knew the truth was no longer on her side. She stood there in the den, rigid and pale, as if the very air had shifted against her. I didn't move right away. I let the silence settle, let the weight of what she now understood sink deeper into her mind. The clock above the fireplace ticked softly, each second stretching longer than it should, until even that sound felt like it belonged to the moment. Outside the doorway, the muffled party noises grew restless. Someone laughed too loudly. A glass clinked. The music changed to another upbeat song that didn't match the tension tightening the walls of the room around us. She glanced toward the hall, her breath catching as if she feared what people might overhear. "You can still stop this," she whispered. "We can go back out there and pretend nothing happened." I lowered the paper in my hand. "Can you pretend nothing happened?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For a long second she simply stood there, her hands trembling at her sides. In the lamplight I could see how tightly she was gripping her own fingers, her knuckles white. She had never looked that fragile. Or that unsure. I placed the document carefully back inside the folder, my fingers brushing the edges in a slow, deliberate motion. I didn't slam it shut. I didn't make any dramatic gesture. I simply closed it softly, yet she flinched as if I'd shouted. I don't understand why this matters so much to you, she said suddenly, taking a step toward me. It's just a house. No, I said. It's a home. And there's a difference. She shook her head. Her hair fell across her cheek and she pushed it back with a shaky hand. You're doing this to punish me. If I wanted to punish you, I said calmly, I would have done it a long time ago. She opened her mouth again, then closed it, her brows knitting together. A storm of emotions flickered across her face. Anger, fear, confusion, denial. But beneath all of it was something else. Something quieter. Something that made her seem almost human again. Guilt. What are you going to do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I haven't decided yet. That wasn't entirely true. I knew more than I was letting on. But this wasn't a moment for declarations. It was a moment for clarity. The house lights flickered, just slightly but enough for both of us to notice. He glanced up, startled. What was that? Old wiring, I said. It happens sometimes. That was true. But the timing made her nervous and I could feel the shift in the air. She wasn't in control anymore. She couldn't predict what was coming next. And that was new for her. I stood slowly from the chair, feeling the familiar stiffness in my knees. She watched me rise, her eyes following every movement as if she expected me to make a sudden, irreversible decision. But all I did was walk past her toward the hallway. Where are you going? She asked quickly. Somewhere I should have gone hours ago. She hesitated, then hurried after me. You can't do anything without talking to him first. Then I'll talk to him. He won't understand, she said. He'll think you're overreacting. He's my son, I replied softly, not my judge. Her mouth tightened. That wasn't the answer she wanted. We reached the hallway and the distant party noises grew louder. Guests were gathered near the kitchen now, their voices overlapping in messy, confused conversations. Some had noticed we were gone too long. Others were probably wondering where the hostess had disappeared to. As she followed behind me, she touched my arm lightly. Please don't make a scene. I'm not the one who created one. She pulled her hand back as if burned. We walked through the living room where a few guests paused mid-sentence to glance at us. The older couple from the church looked especially uneasy. One woman whispered something under her breath. A man nudged his companion and nodded in our direction. My daughter-in-law stiffened. She hated attention when it wasn't flattering. She hated eyes on her when she wasn't performing. She tried to adjust her expression into something polite, but it faltered the moment a guest frowned at the tension between us. I continued walking until I reached the far end of the house, the utility hallway that led to the storage room, and beyond that the electrical breaker panel. She realized where I was heading and stepped in front of me, blocking the narrow passage. You're not doing this, she said firmly, shaking her head. Move, I said. No. Move, I repeated. Or what? She demanded. Her tone cracked on the last word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch her. I simply stepped closer until she had to tilt her chin upward to hold eye contact. You pushed me out of my own home, I said quietly. You humiliated me in front of guests. You spoke to me like I didn't matter. But you forgot something. I let the silence stretch. I built this place, I whispered. And tonight I'm taking it back. Her breath stuttered. She stepped aside without another word. I walked down the hallway, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. The closer I got to the storage room, the heavier the air felt, like the house itself was holding its breath. The room was dim when I entered. I reached for the small pull chain on the overhead light and tugged. A warm yellow glow filled the space. The breaker panel loomed on the back wall, its metal surface cold and slightly dusty. I could smell detergent, old linens, and the faint scent of cedar from the wooden shelves. I heard her footsteps behind me, hesitant, unsure. What do you think turning off the power will accomplish? She asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I opened the metal door of the panel. It screeched slightly, another sound she found outdated. She once suggested replacing it with a modern system. I told her no. She didn't ask why. She rarely asked why about anything that wasn't directly related to her. My fingers rested on the main switch. You're acting out of anger, she said, her voice trembling. No, I murmured. I'm acting out of memory. She exhaled shakily. What does that even mean? It means, I said, looking at the switch, you pushed the wrong woman tonight. Her breath caught softly behind me. I didn't pull the switch right away. My hand hovered just above it, my heart beating steadily, not fast, not frantic. Calm. Like I'd stepped back into myself after being gone for years. In that tiny room with the house humming around us and the clock nearing 11 p.m., I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not of the property. Of my voice. My life. My place. She stepped closer, her breath unsteady. Please, don't do this. For once, I said gently, you're not in control. Then with a simple flick of my wrist I pulled the switch down. The house fell into instant darkness. The music cut off sharply. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone gasped. Somewhere across the hall a glass shattered. The sudden silence spread outward like a wave, swallowing every room until the entire ranch went still. She inhaled sharply behind me. What did you do? I turned slowly, allowing my eyes to adjust to the faint glow of moonlight from the small window near the ceiling. What needed to be done? I said. Voices echoed in the living room, confused and rising. Why is it dark? Did the fuse blow? Is the power out? I stepped past her, heading toward the doorway. She followed, panic tightening her movements. You can't just. I can, I said, moving into the hallway. And I did. The ranch felt different now, quiet, stripped, honest. Without lights, without music, without the distractions she used to control the mood, the truth of the night finally broke through. And as we reached the entrance to the living room, faces turned toward us, waiting for answers, suspicion rising in their eyes. I felt a calm certainty settle into my bones. This was only the beginning. That thought stayed with me as I stepped into the living room, the darkness folding around us like a heavy curtain. The guests were shapes and murmurs in the dim moonlit space, their confused voices blending into a low hum that filled every corner of the house. Someone was fumbling with their phone flashlight. Someone else whispered my daughter-in-law's name, waiting for her to take control of the situation the way she always tried to. But she didn't move. She lingered beside me, barely breathing, as if the dark itself had pinned her in place. My eyes adjusted slowly, picking up outlines. The mantel decorated with evergreen garlands, the clutter of half-finished drinks on the coffee table, the shadows of people shifting anxiously. I could feel the energy in the room changing again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was expectation. Everyone was waiting for an explanation. I took the first step forward. Immediately, conversations quieted. A few guests turned their flashlights toward me, their beams cutting wide arcs through the darkened space. I lifted a hand slightly, not to hush them, but because the light felt too harsh against a moment that wasn't meant to be gentle. Is everything all right? A neighbor asked, her voice cautious. Before I could respond, my daughter-in-law pushed past me, her voice strained. The power went out. There's nothing to worry about. It's just a fuse. Her attempt at control sounded hollow. Even she must have heard it, because she forced a smile too quickly, as if she hoped no one would look too closely at her trembling hands. I stepped beside her. The breaker is fine, I said simply. Her head whipped toward me. What? I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The guests' reactions were enough. Surprised, confused, attentive. For the first time that night, their focus shifted from her performance to my presence. The house is safe, I continued calmly. I turned the power off. A gasp rippled through the room. You turned it off? Someone asked. I nodded once. Yes. My daughter-in-law's voice cracked. Why would you do that? I needed the night to stop, I said. Just for a moment. No one spoke. Even the air felt still. A man, my husband's old friend Richard, stepped forward, his flashlight casting a pale circle on the floor. Do you need help with something? He asked gently. It wasn't an offer of pity. It was an offer of respect, the kind people reserved for someone they trusted. His tone made her twitch. She hated when people saw me as the authority figure she couldn't replace. I'm fine, I said. I just need everyone to step outside for a few minutes. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, but they obeyed. They gathered their coats, their purses, their half-finished drinks and moved toward the back patio. A few whispered privately. No one questioned me. Not one. My daughter-in-law's voice hissed at me as soon as the room thinned. What are you doing? You can't just shut down a party. I didn't shut down the party, I said. I paused it. That's the same thing. No, I said, it isn't. I walked toward the kitchen doorway. She followed close behind, her breath shallow. Please don't do this, she whispered. Not in front of everyone. You already did that, I reminded her softly. Earlier. When you put your hands on me. She stopped walking. Kept going. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the faint glow from outside. The smell of food still hung in the air, warm rolls, cranberry glaze, roasted herbs. The candles she'd arranged on the counter were now extinguished, thin plumes of smoke curling faintly upward. My son stood by the island, his phone flashlight pointed downward as he tried to make sense of the confusion around him. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. Mom, he asked. Is everything okay? For a moment I didn't answer. I studied his face instead. The exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he braced himself between us out of habit. He had been keeping peace for so long he didn't know how to stand still without looking stretched thin. She stepped beside me quickly. Your mother shut off the entire house. She's upset about something but she won't tell me what. My son blinked. You turned it off? Yes, I said quietly. I did. For what reason? He asked carefully. I exhaled slowly. We need to talk. His eyes moved between us, sensing the undercurrent he had ignored for too long. Should we talk privately? No, I said, surprising even myself. This house isn't a private matter anymore. Not tonight. He frowned, confused. My daughter-in-law stiffened, her pulse racing visibly at her throat. Mom, he said, what's going on? I set the folder on the kitchen island. The sound was soft but it cut through the room like a clap. He stared at it, then at me, then back at it. What is that? He asked. Something your wife hoped I'd forgotten. She stepped forward quickly, her voice sharp with panic. Don't open it. It's already open, I said. He hesitated before reaching toward the folder. She grabbed his arm. Don't, please don't. He pulled his arm free gently. I have the right to know what's inside. No, you don't, she insisted. This is nothing. It's old paperwork, things that don't matter anymore. I felt a pang of something, sadness maybe, as I watched her panic unfold. She still believed she could bend truth with sheer will. She still believed fear would protect her. But fear doesn't protect anyone. It only exposes what someone tried to hide. It matters, I said softly. Because tonight everything changed. He opened the folder. Fully. Carefully. He read the first page. His expression softened with nostalgia at his father's signature. Then tightened as he read more. A blend of disbelief, confusion, and dawning understanding moved across his features. What is this clause? He asked quietly. I think you know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He looked up at her. Did you sign this? Her silence answered for her. He looked at me next, hurt and shock mixing in his eyes. Mom, you never told me. You never asked, I said gently. He rubbed his forehead. Why didn't she ever mention this? Because she never thought it would matter. My daughter-in-law suddenly swept the folder off the counter, papers scattering to the floor like a broken confession. Stop acting like this changes anything, she cried. This is ridiculous. Old documents shouldn't decide our lives. It's not the documents, I said. It's your choices. She backed away from me as if my words physically pushed her. But I didn't move forward. I simply stood there, steady. My son knelt to pick up the papers. You agreed to all of this, he said to her. Why? Because your mother pressured me, she snapped. I wasn't even in the room, I replied calmly. You influenced everything. My son rose slowly, holding the papers in his hand. Is that true? He asked her. Her silence again answered for her. Not truthfully, just loudly. Before he could speak, a knock sounded at the back door. We all turned. Richard stood outside with a jacket pulled around his shoulders, the early chill of morning already beginning to settle. Behind him, other guests were murmuring, waiting for direction. The sky was still dark, but a faint line of light brushed the horizon. Everything all right in here? He asked. My son opened the door. We're fine. Richard glanced at me, then at my daughter-in-law, whose face was pale with dread. People are wondering whether they should go home. You can send them home, I said. The night is over. My daughter-in-law stared at me in horror. You're ending the party? Yes. She looked at my son, desperate for him to object. Are you going to let her do this? He swallowed hard. I don't think we have a choice right now. Her eyes glistened. This is my event. This is my home, I said gently. Her breathing faltered. Her anger recoiled and twisted into something smaller, sharper. Fear mixed with realization. And for the first time I saw in her eyes a truth she couldn't outrun. She was losing. Not because I wanted her to, but because her choices had finally caught up. The sky outside brightened a little more, turning the edges of the clouds faint pink. Dawn was approaching. This isn't fair, she whispered, tears forming. Fairness, I said, isn't measured by who shouts the loudest. She shook her head, her voice breaking open. You're taking everything from me. No, I said softly. You handed it away. The guests drifted off. The house emptied. The quiet grew heavier. And as the first true light of morning slipped across the windows, warming the kitchen tile beneath my feet, I stood still, knowing nothing about this moment was simple. It was honest. It was necessary. But far from finished. Because dawn had come. And with it, the consequences she never believed would arrive. That thought echoed in my mind as the rising sunlight slipped further across the kitchen floor, warming the tile beneath my feet. The house was quiet now, still, heavy, stripped clean of noise and performance. My son stood to my right, the folder clutched loosely in his hand, those scattered pages trembling slightly between his fingers. She stood across from us, arms crossed tightly around herself, as if trying to shield her body from a cold that wasn't coming from the morning air. This can't be happening, she whispered again, her voice cracking on the last word. But it was happening. Not because I forced it, because she created the path that led her here. The faint clatter of the front door closing told me the last guest had finally stepped off the property. For the first time in hours, the ranch felt like mine again. Quiet, respectful, grounded. I inhaled slowly. The scent of early morning dew drifted in through the half-open window, mixing with the fading aroma of last night's food. Life outside was beginning again, even if the storm inside this kitchen hadn't settled yet. My son looked down at the papers one more time. I don't understand, he murmured. Why would you sign something like this? She pressed her back against the counter, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Because your mother cornered me into it, she said. I turned toward her, my voice calm but steady. I didn't corner you. This was signed because you wanted to move in here before the wedding. We gave you the choice. You signed the agreement willingly. That was years ago, she shouted. Why does it matter now? Because you violated it, I said. Tonight. She blinked, stunned, as if she expected the night's events to be seen as a minor misunderstanding rather than a defining line she had crossed. My son rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he'd done since childhood whenever he felt overwhelmed. Can't we just sort this out privately? He asked. No, I said gently. Tonight wasn't private. She made sure of that. The truth of that settled over him slowly. His shoulders dropped. He looked older than he had hours ago, not because of age but because he was finally seeing clearly. My daughter-in-law stepped forward, her voice trembling. We can talk about this. We don't need papers. We don't need rules. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. Pushing me out of my own home wasn't a mistake, I replied softly. It was a choice. He went still. The words sank in slowly, painfully, because she knew they were true. I walked toward the dining table. The chairs were still slightly askew from where guest had sat earlier. A napkin lay crumpled near the centerpiece. A wreath she insisted on buying because she didn't like the one I made. I smoothed the napkin not because it mattered but because small things often anchor the moment. Sit, I said, pulling out a chair. My son obeyed immediately. She hesitated, but when I looked at her she finally sat across from us, her fingers twisting anxiously in her lap. This house, I began, has been in our family for generations. I raised my children here. I built a life here. I buried my husband from this home. It carries memories I don't expect you to understand, but I do expect you to respect. Her eyes softened for a brief moment, but the softness didn't last. I didn't mean to disrespect you, she mumbled. You shoved me, I said. In front of your guests. Her face flushed. I was overwhelmed. You were claiming ownership, I corrected. You said it was your event in your home. You declared it in front of everyone. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing she could say. My son looked between us, his voice small. I didn't hear that. You weren't in the room, I said gently. But they were. He lowered his gaze, absorbing the truth. Silence settled again, but this time it felt different. Tense, cautious, waiting. I need you both to understand something, I continued. I don't enjoy confrontation. I don't want chaos in my home. I spent years trying to avoid this moment. But tonight showed me exactly what I've been ignoring. Her breath hitched. So what happens now? I reached for the folder. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just firmly, purposefully. I pulled out the final page. The one with my signature, my husband's, the attorney's, and hers. Clause 4. The clause she always hoped I'd forgotten. The clause she violated tonight. I placed the page in the center of the table. This, I said softly, is what happens now. She leaned forward, her eyes widening. You're not serious. I am. This will ruin me, she whispered. No, I corrected gently. This will free me. My son swallowed hard. Mom, what exactly does that clause say? I skimmed it earlier, but I tapped the line with my finger. It states that any intentional act of disrespect toward the property owner results in immediate removal of residency privileges. You reread it. Fully. His expression shifted, shock giving way to understanding, then sorrow. And pushing you out, he whispered. Yes, I said. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't enforce this. This house belongs to him too. My son shook his head. Legally, it doesn't. Not yet. You know Dad didn't finalize the transfer. She froze. He continued, voice barely above a whisper. I kept telling you we'd handle it later. That we'd talk about it with Mom. You didn't want to wait, because you assumed the house would eventually be ours. She sank slowly back into the chair, her hand covering her mouth. Her shoulders trembled. This isn't fair, she said again, but this time it was a whisper, not a defense. I leaned back slightly. Fairness isn't measured by who wins. It's measured by who respects. The sun was rising fully now, illuminating the room in soft gold. Dust motes floated gently across the beams of light. The house looked peaceful again, untouched by last night's chaos. I stood. I've arranged for movers. They'll be here in 2 hours. You have until then to pack your personal items. Her head jerked up. 2 hours? You can't just throw me out. I'm not throwing you out, I said. I'm enforcing a contract you signed. Tears welled in her eyes. Where am I supposed to go? You're an adult, I replied softly. You'll figure it out. She looked at my son desperately. You're just going to let her do this? He stared at the floor. You hurt my mother, he said quietly. And you didn't even apologize. He choked on a breath. I didn't think. No, he said. You didn't. He stood slowly. I'll help you pack. She reached for him, but he stepped back. Not out of anger, out of painful realization. I turned away to give them space, but not before hearing her whisper, please don't leave me alone through this. His reply was quiet but firm. I won't leave you alone. But I won't fight Mom for you. I walked toward the front porch. The air outside was crisp, fresh, cleansing. Birds had begun to chirp near the fence line. The ranch looked exactly as it did every morning. Steady, timeless, mine. For the first time in years, I felt my heartbeat settle into something peaceful. A new beginning. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just honest. The movers arrived exactly on time. They were quiet, respectful men who handled her belongings gently. She cried softly as they carried out the last box, though she tried to hide it beneath her hair. I watched from the porch, not with cruelty, not with triumph, just with clarity. When she finally stepped through the gate, suitcase in hand, she turned back toward me. You'll regret this, she said through trembling lips. No, I replied simply. I'll remember this. The gate closed. The truck pulled away. The dust settled. And just like that, my home exhaled. My son stepped beside me, quiet and thoughtful. Mom, are you okay? I squeezed his hand gently. I'm more than okay. I looked out across the land I had built a life on. The morning sun warmed my face. The wind stirred the grasses. The ranch felt alive again. "This," I whispered, "is my peace." And with that, I took my final word back. If this story moved you, shocked you, or reminded you of your own strength, make sure to subscribe. I share powerful emotional revenge stories every week, and I don't want you to miss the next twist.